Hey everybody, today is Monday, June 12th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the HBO original series Barry, editor Franky Guttman.
I was the most shocked when Bill said, okay, it's time for Franky's close-up. I was like, what? What are we doing? No.
And editor Greer.
Working with Bill because he's directing, wrote it, is in it, sometimes it can go really fast. Because when something isn't working, he knows exactly because he's talked about it in the writer's room and then forgot that there was a detail that didn't make it into a new scene when they cut that scene.
Yes, all that and a lot more in this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, hey there. No need to get up. Stay right where you are. I will do all the work here. All you got to do is listen. That's a pretty good deal, right? An even better deal is the episode I have for you today. We're going to be talking about a show created by and starring a Saturday Night Live alum. A show that definitely balances comedy and drama. A show that just wrapped up its final season. And before you say, yeah, you did that one last week, it was Ted Lasso. Well, hang on. This week, we are talking about the HBO original series Barry, starring and created by Bill Hader. As you know, we met Ted Lasso's AJ Catiline and Melissa McCoy last week. Well, this week we're talking to Barry's Franky Guttman and Greer. Allie's been on The Rough Cut before, last time as part of the cutting crew from Hacks, another HBO show. Franky, on the other hand, is making his big debut on the podcast. He's been on all 4 seasons of Barry, beginning his journey as an assistant editor, and then sharing editing duties with Allie on the last 2 seasons. As I mentioned, Bill Hader stars as the title character, an ex-Marine turned hitman who's trying to leave that life behind by unleashing his inner thespian. The show begins with Barry being paid to snuff out some guy who would run afoul of a Chechen mob boss. Hey, who hasn't done that before? And while he was tailing this guy, Barry stumbled into the acting class his Mark was taking. And you know how that all goes. Barry was bitten by the acting bug, and for the first time, saw a way out of his meaningless yet lethal existence. What takes place over the next 4 seasons cannot be summed up in a few simple sentences by me, but luckily for both of us, we have Allie and Franky on hand to give us the view from the cutting rooms. Before we check in with them, let's take a quick side trip to talk about what you can do to make sure your next film or TV show sounds amazing. And the place you got to go to get those amazing sounds is Extreme Music, of course. Not only do they have a deep bench of dynamite artists who are at the very apex of the production audio game, but from those artists, Extreme Music has cultivated a catalog that is absolutely overflowing with top-shelf tracks that you can use to elevate your project. That's a mouthful. Despite that catalog's incredible size, combing through it could not be easier. All you got to do is a little keyword search using terms like lyrics, tempo, genre, composer, era. You get the idea. They give you back tracks with options for length and instrumentation. On top of that, you can even help accelerate humanity's demise at the unseen hands of AI by giving Extreme Music a reference track so they can find you ones just like it. All of this, including the licensing, can be done right there on the web. Or if you need a little friendly guidance, you can talk to one of their reps at an office near you. Near is a relative term. No matter where you are, the next time you need to make a little magic in your movie, make it with Extreme Music. Okay, as much as I'm sad that Barry is over, I am thrilled that I finally get to talk to the editors behind it. So let's not wait any longer. Here are editors Franky Guttman and Greer.
That sounds really cool. Tell me more.
You're here to tell me about editing.
Yeah, be careful.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty much hardwired to start these interviews off talking about how the editors got on the show or in the film, but I'm going to try and delay that for a moment so we can start off talking about probably what will be one of many questions about tone. It certainly felt like the show trended darker and darker over the years, maybe not linearly, but if you go back and look at the first few episodes of season 1 and the last of season 4, I think you'd be like, wait a minute, what happened to this show? So my first question for both of you is, now that the show is over, is it the same show you thought it was when you joined?
Good question. Is it the same show I thought when I joined? I mean, no, it's not, but I think that's a good thing. I think as we were in the process of making the show and as Bill kind of got stronger and stronger as a filmmaker, which is like really cool to kind of watch happen. You know, like when Bill directed the pilot, I'm pretty sure that was the first thing he had really ever directed. And so one of the coolest things about working on the show for all 4 seasons has kind of been like watching Bill evolve and watching him become more confident. And it's been really interesting. It's sort of like taken place the same time as like my creative development and confidence has kind of developed, you know, starting as an assistant editor on the first season, then becoming an editor and getting more confidence in terms of that. So it's kind of been this nice parallel. And so I think, yeah, the first couple seasons are maybe more comedic, but I think the last 2 seasons to me are more interesting. because I think a lot of times with comedies, you can get kind of stuck in joke, 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 joke. And I really like the way that we've kind of evolved it to where the humor is coming more from the situation and less from like a character said a funny line. And a lot of times we end up cutting that stuff out because we're just like, the more we think about the tone and the way the story works, it's like, that's a really funny line, but we're like killing the moment and the story is what's most important versus like having you chuckle or laugh, you know? I think really the process the last two seasons it's really just been about simplifying the story. What's the story? What's the emotion? What's this character feeling in this moment? And I think a lot of times, you know, if you're taking breaks for comedy, I mean, unless you have a character like NoHo Hank, who, like, Anthony's amazing and he can kind of like toe that line. But if you're having like these emotional scenes and then you're like cutting away from jokes, you're just like killing the emotion, you're killing the story. So I think it's just to me, it's evolved to be just more interesting in terms of filmmaking. I know maybe there are some people who are like, wish it was funnier or whatever, but I don't feel that way.
Yeah, I think it's like certainly less focused on jokes in the last few seasons, but I'd say when I came onto the show in season 3, the things that Bill enjoyed making the most were the Ronnie Lily episode and kind of that super tense feeling of like there was like this scene during Macbeth when he like comes out and there's a lot of intercutting and it's very like dramatic. And I remember talking about that in the interview and he was like, yeah, I really love that tone and this is kind of where I want to take seasons 3 and 4 and kind of expand on the story and not get stuck at the acting class and stuff like that. Let these characters grow into something a little more honest to like a human emotional story about somebody they love that was murdered.
Well, Franky, as you said, you've been on since the beginning. You know, I think when you started off, you were assisting. Was it Jeff Buchanan? Was he primarily who you were assisting?
Yeah, I assisted Jeff on this show, and then I assisted Kyle Ryder, the other editor of the first two seasons, on another show. So I worked for both of them.
Well, let's talk about that. So going back to you getting on the show, Barry, how did that all happen?
Before I started as an assistant on the first season, I had like decided I was never going to be an assistant editor ever again. And then I was sick of it. And then I was too good for it. And I was tired of doing all the grunt work. And then Ernie Gilbert, who was the other assistant on the first season, who's now one of my best friends, who at the time was just a guy that I had like met once for coffee to like tell him how to use Avid because he's mostly a Premiere editor and like randomly met him for coffee. Now he's like my best friend. He's like producing this film that we're working on together. But at the time was just another editor that I gave advice to. And he was like, hey, we need an assistant on the show. It's with Bill Hader. It's for HBO. And so I was like, I need money. Sure, I'll go. And I walked in and I talked to Jeff. And like, you know, Jeff has worked with Spike Jonze, who's one of my favorite directors. And just talking with Jeff and seeing the pilot that they had shot. And I was like, all of my reservations about being an assistant kind of went out the window. And it was probably the best decision I ever made in my life. It was just such a no-brainer watching the pilot. Like the second I stepped into the room at Sony, I was like, all right, I'm in. I want this.
Allie, I need some advice here. Do I dare ask Franky what it was he was working on that made him go, I'm never assisting again?
Yeah, probably. I want to know.
I can tell you off the record, but you know, it's just a grind, and I do consider myself, you know, a very creative person. I think it's hard as an assistant editor. I mean, it's something I tried really hard to do on the first couple seasons, which is probably why I stood out. But it's difficult as an assistant editor to like stand out creatively and have that kind of role. And I think that's just in terms of like a life priority thing was not what I wanted. Like I have plenty of friends who are assistant editors and it's like a great career and they're amazing at it. And I think that's great. It just wasn't what I wanted, but I'm glad that I changed my mind.
Well, I am too, because I've seen your work. So,
oh, thank you.
Allie, last time we spoke, you were working on Hacks. How was it you came to join Barry for the final 2 seasons?
I came on to join Barry in like 2019, and then Barry didn't happen for 2 years later. And so I interviewed with Bill Hader, and I'm not sure how I knew Kyle and Jeff as like just personally. I don't know if they had recommended me. I also had worked with Fred Armisen on Portlandia, who's good friends with Bill. And so maybe it was that connection, but I came in for like a cold interview and just really hit it off with Bill and was like, he's amazing. He's so kind and open and easy to be around that we just like laughed and talked about movies. And then after I was like, I didn't talk at all about work. I hope that went okay. Like, I just was hanging out with him. And Alec Berg and Aida Rogers, the UPM, and producer. So yeah, it was really great. And then I got the call like in November 2019, and the show didn't happen till August of 2021. So I did Hacks in between there, Schmigadoon in between there. And I think one more, I did a film in between that.
I think I did a film. I don't know.
It was so long. It was like COVID years. So like once I got hired before COVID and then that happened and it was like, oh, we're not going to film during COVID until vaccines are out and stuff. And so then it took 2 years.
For you, Franky, we talked about the connection to Jeff and Kyle, but what about Alec and Bill and talking to them? What discussions did you have with them when you joined the show?
You know, when I first joined as an assistant, I really didn't talk to them at all. I just talked to Jeff and he hired me. But, you know, it was cool. I mean, I just really tried to, this is probably not great advice for assistant editors because it can be kind of annoying, but like, I just took every opportunity to kind of like just show that I was like a funny, interesting person. So like there's stuff in like season 1, I think, like Hank sends Barry a Bitmoji. So I had my friend who is like actually designed like the competitor to Bitmoji. I had her design one and make one, and it ended up being the one that's in the show. And like I made like, you know, I was making like all the temp graphics and all the temp VFX, and I was like trying to like slip little things in and make it look cool. And so like eventually over time, they just would like see that stuff and they'd be like, oh, who did that? Oh, Franky made that. Oh, that's awesome. And then just from being in the cutting room, and Bill just loves being in the cutting room. Like he's just always there hanging out. And the first couple seasons, our cutting rooms were tandem. They're these like terrible tandem rooms. At Sony, where to get to the editor's room, you have to go through the assistant editor's room. So it was just like by luck of the crappy editing space that we were working in, that like every time Bill was going into the cutting room, he had to pass into my room. And every time Alec was going into the cutting room, he would pass into my room. So I got to talk to them more than I probably would have if I was in an office like on the other side of the hall. So it's just kind of random, and just over time got to know them. And then when the slot was up, I was just like, I want it.
Well, I think that is great advice. You know, finding ways to make yourself valuable above and beyond what it might say in the job description. I think that's excellent advice and certainly worked for you.
Did you like call Bill and you were like, they're not coming back, can I edit?
Yeah, I emailed him. Well, first, I think I emailed Aida first, maybe. And then but I literally just emailed him. And then randomly, because I was working on Kidding, I was cutting season 2 of Kidding on the Sony lot. My life always leads me to the Sony lot. Like, my first real editing gig was on the Sony lot cutting trailers for TV shows. And then I've done 2 seasons of Kidding, 4 seasons of Barry. I've been on the Sony lot for maybe like 7 or 8 years. So just from being on the Sony lot, like Alec Berg was just like sitting eating his lunch by himself, and I said, hey, and I sat down and I like literally just asked him I was like, hey, yeah, I'm Kidding down the hall. Like, yeah, I'd really love to cut season 3. Like, it was just random. I literally walked into him. I was like, okay, it seems like the universe maybe wants this for me. Fingers crossed.
Well, I think you're right. That is very cool. This is all great advice. What are you talking about? I can't believe you started off with, I don't think this is good advice.
Well, you know, sometimes it's hard. You have to just like pick your spot, and you don't want to be, that's the hardest part about it. And I'm like a super anxious person when it comes to that stuff. I never want to bother people. So it's just, you just have to pick your spots.
No, I think that is the art. I've heard this many times. It's like, you got to stand up yourself without being a pain in somebody's ass.
Yeah.
There's an art to that. I don't know if I've mastered that. Let's talk about what the show is about. I mentioned I went back and I watched the first few and the last few again, just to sort of encapsulate it. In the pilot, Fuchs FedExes Barry a gun, which is pretty funny. And then, of course, in the finale, Barry walks out of a superstore armed to the teeth just by saying to the clerk, guns. And then also there's this pursuit of fame that's very central to what goes on in the show. So I guess the question is, for Bill and Alec, what is the show about?
Guns are definitely central to the show, given that he's an assassin. That's a big part of the...
That's how it works, yeah.
Exactly, that's part of it. But I think like what Bill would always talk about is making sure that the jokes are never at the expense of somebody being killed. And so I think the jokes are around it and kind of around how easy it is to get a gun in the United States, or how detectives don't do the best detective work and they don't always get the right person or something like that. But he tries to not make a joke about somebody being dead. And so I think that the show in general is about, he would always say like he didn't know it until he had kids, but as soon as he had kids, he was like, I would kill for this kid. And he was like, and I think a lot of people would feel that way. And so it's kind of about these relationships that are so deeply important for you that it would drive you to do things that you never would have thought you would do.
Wow, that's a great summation. Yeah, it's you're right. There's a lot of Fuchs telling Barry, I love you. Barry telling Mr. Cousineau, who he never calls Gene, just Mr. Cousineau, Mr. Cousineau, I love you.
Right.
There is that sort of I would kill for this person parental kind of component to it. That's just my observation.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, he always tries to make it the relationships be the most important part of the show, and that they feel like honest characters and the characters interact in ways that feel like it makes sense. Like it's not that they're doing something really wild, even though wild things happen.
You interviewed and you were going to take the job, Mrs. Alley. Pandemic hits and it's like, oh, I think I'll go do some films and hacks. Once the show came back and season 3 started, where were you in the process? Were you remote? How did the post-production situation play out right then?
Coming back in 2021, it was like we do our editor's cut from home. And then once they've wrapped production, then we come into the Sony lot and work together. I think the first season we like tested every day. And then the second season we tested 3 days a week up until like a couple months ago. So that was pretty deep into having vaccines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this key like crew and cast members that have health conditions, so I think they just wanted to be very. I think we were probably the most cautious production, I would say, fairly out of the ones all my friends worked on.
Yeah,
which is great for me because I have like little kids and stuff.
I think like Bill also really wanted to work in person, which was really fun.
Yeah,
and then we ended up like in the middle of season 3 or like kind of at the beginning of the editing process. He just wanted both of us in the room no matter what episode.
And so how did the working remote part either inhibit or enhance your work? What were the impacts of working remotely on the work that you were doing?
For me, it's kind of, at least for dailies, it's kind of great because I am a person who likes to work late at night and I also have little kids at home. So it's just amazing to be able to take my own time and make my own schedule, but also like if an idea strikes when I'm in bed at 10 o'clock, I can just get up, go to my office and like cut the scene, which is just like so great for my process, and just like stay up till 4 in the morning, like cutting. Cause like sometimes the middle of the day is tough with the little ones at home. So just that flexibility and the space and the being able to make your own time. And as much as I've been at the Sony lot all my life, it is quite a far drive from my house. So, you know, that's 2 extra hours a day that I get. So that's huge for that part of the process. But I do feel like working in person for the director's cut, producer's cut, I think is pretty essential. So I'm glad that we did that for that part of the process, because I've done remote for that and it's just not the same, I think.
What about your ability to collaborate with one another?
I'd say like for our editor's cuts, we would get the cuts together and then I would say like, hey, Franky, I like finished episode 1, we watch it, give me your notes. And then Franky would give me a long list of notes of like, oh, I don't know about this could, you could work on this, stuff like that. So we always try to like see it before going in and working with the producer so that we're kind of on the same page.
And what about your actual editing system set up at home? Like, what do you absolutely have to have? I know a lot of people have talked about like, well, I like to work in 5.1, but that's just not possible at home. Say I dropped by your house, Franky, and you showed me your Avid setup. What would it look like?
You will find a very basic system. It's like a Mac Studio, 2 monitors, and 2 very small speakers. They're like Genelec speakers, which I love, and a keyboard and a mouse. I don't really have a complicated setup. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like having all the gack in my office and like having all the giant speakers and the stands and like a giant, like I have friends that work on the like 48-inch widescreen monitor, and it's just like it gives me a headache. I like to keep it kind of simple. That's just not me.
How about you, Allie?
I work on a pretty basic system too, just a iMac and an external monitor, 2 bookshelf speakers, regular mouse, nothing too fancy. But when we work with like producers and stuff, it is nice to have like a TV, and then you're like,
yeah,
oh, I never saw that. Like I never saw. Yeah. I'm constantly like playing back in full screen so that I can see at least like the 27-inch version. But then when you see it on TV, you're like, oh wow. And then when you see it projected like during a sound mix, and it's like absolutely as big as the room, and I'm like,
yeah,
oh my god, there's so much about this shot that I never was able to see. So
It's like, oh, I should have fixed that.
I mean, the post team of John McCracken and Art Rousses, and they do a really good job spouting all of those little details that we might miss, or looking at all the reflections and making sure they deal with it. So,
Going back to the pandemic, I had read that by the time you came back to work on season 3, that Bill and Alec had all the scripts done for 3 and 4. Is this true or just internet lore?
that's true.
Okay.
They had written at least like the outlines and had rough scripts, and then I think they rewrote 4 again a little bit in between the seasons, but they had both seasons. It was kind of thought of as one unit.
Well, so the reason I bring it up is I was talking with the editors of Ted Lasso the other day, and they were mentioning that they don't know where the show is going. They get scripts along the way. And I thought, well, that could present some challenges about like, now that I know this, I would look at episode 2 differently. And of course, they concurred with that. They're like, yeah, you're right. We had to go back and change certain things to make the later episodes resonate a little better. Were you both up to speed from the very beginning? Like, I know where this show is going the next 2 seasons?
We didn't have drafts of scripts. It was mostly just like being in the room with Bill, and Bill would just tell us everything that happened and kind of just spoil the show for us, or like call us in the morning and be like, oh, I have this great idea. What if Fuchs does this and he goes in here? And you're like, yes, that's like anytime Bill calls you in the morning, you know, it's going to be like a genius idea that he came up with overnight that like fixes some problem that was bothering him, and you're just like you know, it'll be the afternoon, there'll be some problem, you'll just be like, all right, Bill's gonna go home and I'm gonna get a call tomorrow morning and he's gonna have fixed it, and it's gonna be hilarious and amazing.
And the call will come in at 6 a.m. The call comes in very early, always very early.
Yeah, which is great. So we didn't necessarily have drafts of scripts, but we like knew everything that was going to happen, which I think is kind of nice and informs, you know, the characters. So we kind of always knew where they were going, but maybe not necessarily, you know, the dialogue.
Yeah, sometimes he'd like describe every scene like in such detail that when I read the scripts, I'm like, oh wait, I think I've read this. And I'm like, oh no, he just like kind of verbatim told me everything that happens. And thankfully he's really open. And he also, before season 4, sent us the scripts and had us like read them over and talk through kind of like, oh, this character seems to be moving really fast. Like, is there enough to get them from point A to point B? And he would be like, yeah, I think, you know, blah, blah, blah. Or then he'd call the next day and it was like, you know, I've been thinking about what you said. I have like added this scene or blah, blah, blah. So it was nice to be a part of the process in that way for season 4.
Yeah, I forgot we did that.
Going back to the first 2 seasons, there were directors other than Bill and Alec. Season 3, Bill and Alec directed all the episodes. Season 4, Bill directs all the episodes. If you can put some parameters around this, how is it different when you're working with a director who is also in the show and also writing the show?
I think initially Bill was very sensitive about his performance and was like not always would have to like take a walk or something after watching himself. But as we went on, especially in season 4, he kind of was better about that. I think it's just mostly stress. Like, it's just so much work being the creator, writer, director, star of a show. And, you know, there's so much crap like outside of production that you don't even think about, which is like, you've got to do press, you've got to go, you're going to be on a magazine. So to do that, you got to get your hair done, or like HBO is calling you and like this person's calling you. And so like, it's just so much to put on one person, which I think is really nice. We really do get a long time to work in post on this show, I think, compared to most TV shows. And they kind of just give Bill free reign and kind of like, you work on your cuts and do what you need to do. Which is good, because sometimes Bill would come in and you could just see on his face that he's just like tired, and he would sit down and the 2 of us are in there and he'd just be like, you know what, I'm going to go home. And we'd be like, yep, you go home. Go home. We can both tell you're not in the mood right now. And it's nice to be able to have that space and not have like the network or the studio breathing down your neck and being like, we need to see the cut now, or like, we need to make this date or that date. You know, for him to have that space, and for us too, because we get to sit on the cut. Like, you know, nobody comes in season 3 and 4. Nobody came into the cutting room until after wrap of the last episode. So we got to sit with all of the episodes, because we didn't do director's cuts because it was just Bill and Alec. So we got to sit with the episodes and think about them and watch them over, and gave us some time, which is really, really nice and a nice luxury. I mean, I know in film, that's kind of how it works. But in TV, that's rare. So I think that's like essential to at least to our process.
And I think that like working with Bill because he's directing and wrote it is in it, sometimes it can go really fast. And that is like a huge asset is because when something isn't working, he knows exactly because he's talked about it in the writer's room and then forgot that there was a detail that didn't make it into a new scene when they cut that scene. And so you're like, oh wait, why did they end up here? And he's like, I know exactly why. You don't know, but I know. And so there's all this like background that a director normally wouldn't have because he's been a part of the whole writing process. And so then rewriting or finding ADR, or like finding ways of solving problems is so fast. And so in one way, Bill is like takes time and the editing process is like a little more expanded than in other shows, but then in another way, he'll get through 4 episodes and send, instead of doing 1 episode at a time to HBO, he'll send 4 at once and say like, here's half the season. And so it just works in a little different way than most shows. And I think part of that is attributed to the fact that he's in it and wrote it and directed it and so close to every moment of it and has been there every day and knows every performance, that it makes working with him like really seamless. And he knows the footage as well as we do, which is really fun and exciting to work with somebody who's that knowledgeable about the show.
Well, in addition to being knowledgeable about the show, Bill famously talks about having been a PA working with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I think he also worked in post in unscripted television at one point. I don't know too much more about that. Suffice to say, the question is, how familiar or intimate is he with the editing process? How much does he know about what it is you two do?
I feel like Bill knows a lot about the editing process. He was, like you said, an assistant editor, and so he knows a lot about like footage and capture and like all of the technical part, but he's not the kind of person that you'd find like at the bay when you walked in working on stuff. Like he doesn't like touch the systems, but he just knows and is kind of following what you're doing and doesn't get frustrated by kind of the style of editing where it's like, you know, you kind of watch through things over and over, and some people get kind of like fatigued at that, but he is very familiar and loves it.
I'm a fan of the show. So what that means is that I end up asking questions that start off with, how come you did this? Or why'd you do that? Which really are not, it's not good protocol for an interview, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Let it rip. Let us know all your questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Franky, this one's for you. The first season, all the episodes were titled Chapter Something.
Yeah.
And then after that, you would completely abandon that after season 1. What's the deal with that?
I mean, obviously the first season, that's the chapters of Gene's book. And I think, so that's, those are the titles of the chapters of his book.
I like how you say, obviously, like.
Oh, I thought it was obvious. I don't know.
like anyone picked up on that? That's so
God,
good.
I felt like such a fraud. I was like, I'm a big fan of the show.
Yeah.
Obviously. Now I feel like a jerk. I thought it was, I mean, from my memory, it's been so long ago, like, you know, like the begin, at least I think 103, you know, Bill's like, maybe that didn't, you know, see, now I'm like, did this make it into the show or did we cut it out? Where, I haven't watched the first season in a while.
Oh, it's really good. You should watch it.
Yeah, I know. It's great. And I don't have like bad flashbacks about it like I do for other shows, so I can watch it as much as I want.
I can't wait for the off the record interview.
Yeah. Off the record interview with me would just be juicy. So those are the titles of Gene's book, and then I think in the second season it was like, well, his book doesn't have, you know, we didn't know how long the show would be. So like his book doesn't have, you know, 60 chapters to it. So you kind of have to change it up. And I don't know where the lowercase thing came from. I know for season 3 and 4, we just get a text from Bill that was just like, here are what I'm thinking for the episode titles. And it would just be like written out, and you'd like give a couple suggestions, and you'd be like, great. So I don't really know what the process is for creating those, but I know after the first season, it was just like, well, we don't want to have it be, definitely didn't want it to have to be like chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, chapter 12.
So what seemed like a good idea at the time just sort of ran out of gas.
Yeah. So if it's running out of gas, I think it's something that the show is good at. It's like, we're running out of gas. Let's just pull the car over and get out of the car and do something else instead of keep trying to like drive the shitty car down the road. You know what I mean?
I do. Way to pick that up and run with it, Franky. Thank you.
It's like Barry not driving shitty cars around the streets.
Yeah.
You know?
Get a new car.
I'm going to park my fan questions for a moment and I'll ask more of a practical one. And that is, you wouldn't really look at Barry and say, oh, this is going to be a VFX heavy show. But as both of you know, every show is a VFX heavy show. And something I never really thought about until editors started really hitting me over the head with it is cell phones and laptop screens. And they would say, oh, that episode had so many screens. And when I thought of that, I started looking at Barry again that way. And I swear, like in every scene, somebody's looking at their phone, looking at a YouTube video on a laptop. So much information comes through in those screens. How much of a pain is that for you? Or do you look at it like, I have assistants, I have a VFX editor, or is that something you even labor to work on?
We usually work on it. And like Franky said, he did a lot of the temp graphics in the first couple seasons. And then I think still seasons 3 and 4 would do some. And Austin Mintz, the post supervisor, did a really good job of always managing what's in that screen. And so it would help us keep it top of mind. As opposed to other shows where it can be like a whole thing where you're like, oh, these screens are taking over. In Barry, I feel like it was never a huge issue. And sometimes it was a fun place for a joke. Like I remember when we came up with, in the last episode, Gene is sitting on his bed looking at all of these articles. And then we came up in the editing room with my dad. What is it, Franky? Do you remember?
Dad, something like my dad gave me $250,000 of drug money and then he shot me. And then there's like that photo of him standing there with his arms folded.
Well, I found out my dad paid for my house with drug money, so he shot me or something. Yeah.
We touched on this a little earlier, but I think it's really worth revisiting because, you know, Allie, you come from Schmigadoon and Hacks and Portlandia, very funny shows with intent to be very funny shows, especially a show like Hacks. It's about a stand-up comedian. A lot of the comedy comes through in jokes and one-liners. For Barry, it's all about performance. I mean, certainly as somebody like NoHo Hank, a lot of it comes through Anthony's performance or reactions to that performance, sight gags. There's a little bit of slapstick comedy, but not jokes. Considering the dark underbelly of the show, is that something you really did have to keep an eye on? I think Franky touched on this a little, but letting the comedy be too broad and betraying the true nature of what these characters are really going through.
I would say that I love cutting comedy because you can know if it's working, because if somebody giggles or even smiles, you're like, yes, I did it. This is the best. But in terms of Barry and in terms of like my personal editing style, I edited episode 5 of this season, which is just Sally and Barry living in the desert. And that to me is like my natural pace. Like, I'm just like, okay, this like slow kind of like ambient drama that happens outside is like something I love cutting, and it's just like a very comfortable place to be in for me. And so I think that Barry is just a perfect tone in that like there are jokes, but that is the style of movies I like to watch. I generally consume a lot of like foreign films and stuff like that. And so having that influence on something like Barry is really exciting to get to work on something that's funny, but then also has all of this emotion and slow and pace and tone that you can play around with.
Can I just say 405 is so good, and the episode that aired is like basically Allie's editor cut. Like she showed it to me and I watched it and I was like, this is so freaking good. This is my favorite episode of the show. Like, I am terrible. This episode is so good. It was like, it's my favorite episode of the show, I think.
Aww.
And it was like all there from what she had. It was amazing.
Aw, Franky, that's so nice. Aw,
It's
you gotta
true.
cut this
I don't even need to be
part.
nice. You deserve it. It was so
You gotta
good.
cut this part.
It's staying in, Allie.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm going to double down. We're going to explore 405 a little bit because that episode 405, actually towards the end of 404, takes a real hard left in that time jump of 8 years. And the pace, the style of the show changes somewhat dramatically. Allie, you just said, hey, that's my style. That's what I like.
I mean, that's Bill's style. That's like 100% Bill's style. It's like he would rather like watch a slow, really like wide, emotional story that doesn't have a lot of style. Like it has a lot of style in that it is slow, but that is very much like the kind of films Bill likes. And I would say 405 is definitely exploring Bill's style. But it also is mine.
Okay,
Which is good.
That's what it's supposed
Which
to
is
be.
why we get along. This is great.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the fan questions, Franky. That time jump actually happens in the last scene of 404. And in looking at it, I was like, well, you could have, I can't remember what the last shot was prior to that. I think it might have been of Jim Moss, like sitting in his car. Oh, no, it was Sally and Barry saying, let's leave. You could have ended there and then started 405 with, okay, now we're in the new world, and really, once again, slap everybody upside the head with this big change to the show. Was it ever considered that we're going to wait to make that time jump in 405 rather than just the last scene in 404?
It was always in 404. We kind of worked that moment a lot, trying to figure out the cut between Sally and Barry and then the time jump. We're trying all these different ideas. At one point, Bill had this idea for this minute-long sound collage of sounds that drags you across time, and we probably spent 2 or 3 days just trying to figure out the transition between the show to the time jump. And then at the end we were just I'll just make it black and we'll cut to it there. I think the reason it started in 404 is you just want to, it's such a big jump and it's such a big move. You want to get the audience ready and you want to start their minds going and kind of give them a little piece of what's going to happen, so that at least in my head, you're not just starting 405 and all of a sudden you're like, wait, where am I? What's going on? You're kind of just leaving some breadcrumbs and leaving that question, so that, it is such a big jump and that episode is so contained. I think it's just getting you ready for it in a really nice way.
It's something else the show never does is there's never any titles, never locations, times. You certainly didn't do the 8 years later. Is that one of those things you said, no, that's not our show. We don't do things like that. We trust the audience? Or is that something you ever considered? Sometimes we got to give them a little help with where they might be or what time or what place it is.
I think that Bill always talks about, don't give the audience 4, give them 2 + 2. And so I think that sometimes that's always his mentality. And so sometimes if things are moving too fast, we'll add in a 2 + 2 somewhere, but it won't be in the form of a title card. And so there'll be little breadcrumbs that you'll kind of find out naturally in a piece of dialogue or a conversation. But it's definitely the style of the show to focus on, let's not handhold too much, but to make sure that people are still following.
Allie, you want to embarrass Franky a little bit? He certainly showered you with affection for 405.
Yeah. Oh, no.
We're going to give it to him for 404.
Yeah, that episode's incredible. My God.
The Hank Cristobal breakup scene.
Oh.
Sometimes it's about what the editor doesn't do as opposed to what they do. And that scene where Hank and Cristobal break up, Cristobal walks out the door. Hank is imploring him not to go. The camera tracks the two of them from the house out into the driveway. And it's just that one shot until Cristobal says to Hank, it's over. And then you cut to a close-up of Hank reacting to that. And then back to that other shot where you track back into the house. I don't remember if it's just the one edit, but that is just a really elegant scene. And I'd love to hear about what you had available to you and the approach you took in making that happen.
Sure. I mean, I love that shot through the door when Cristobal walks out. It's one of my favorite shots in the series. And I just love the way that they played it. And they're just and Cristobal's like, hey, don't touch me. And he's pushing him away and they're fighting. And they're just it's their animal nature. And they're just all artifice is removed.
And I love the part, you did such a good job of having it be so tense and they're talking over each other, and the way that you put it together, it was so impressive that there was so much dynamics between where they started of Hank being a tough guy, and then by the end he's pleading, no, don't leave. And then you get into that one shot and let it go, and it's just, there's so much drama that you did such a good job.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and part of the thing about this show is the actors are so incredible and there's not a bad one amongst them. And a lot of shows you were kind of most people are great, but there's that one person that's hard to cut, and everybody's so good on the show. It makes the job so easy to where you'll just be in 408, the confrontation between Hank and Fuchs, Stephen Root just did this amazing take. It's 5-minute take of his whole monologue, and you're just okay, great, we're using that one. And it's just it's so amazing, and it just makes me feel so lucky to just get to go and watch dailies and just watch these insane actors performing, and they just nail it. And a lot of times you just feel it's I'm not even cooking the meal, I'm just plating the food, because it's so good. And we don't have to I mean, obviously we build performance, but it's we don't have to as much, because sometimes they just freaking nail it, and Bill is pretty short with his coverage, and so if somebody nails it, he's we got it, and you move on. And I think that's so great. And so that was definitely, that scene in 404 is definitely a scene where, I mean, we had options, but they just both nailed it, and was kind of able to just kind of like ride them, and that lets you use a long shot like that, which I think is just nice. Looking through the door frame, you're like, you the viewer are like an observer of this thing that's going on, and because the performances are so good, you can hold like that and you don't have to cut around.
Franky, you walked right into this one. You're right. The actors in this show are amazing and the performances are amazing. There's one to me that stands out amongst all the others, and that is, of course, you playing a security guard.
Oh, no.
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought about letting it go, but you made a point of saying the performances are so great, and we're going to go there. I love talking to editors and asking them about, like, are you in the show at all? Like voiceover, or maybe you're an extra. You have lines. You are performing. You are working in a scene with Henry Winkler.
Yeah.
You got to tell me about how that all happened.
Sure. And not to deflect, but Allie is also the amazing tech support operator in season 3, which is really hilarious too. With the was that the Detonate app?
The Detonate app bomb. But that was my temp VO that they kept it.
That was temp VO that we were like, we kept the.
That's me at my house doing
with your phone.
With my phone that I always do, which is temp VO. But Franky was in the show. He had his name on a trailer. He was like
right.
actually acting. It was amazing.
What was really funny about that was, I guess when they shoot, they just like get lots of extras just in case. So there was this like crew of like 15 security guard extras that were all dressed in the same outfit as me. And then I felt like the king security guard because I had this like little tiny claustrophobic honey. And I get really bad claustrophobia, so I couldn't even be in there that long. And so I like come down the like metal stairs and they're all just like looking at me. And then Bill ended up just cutting them from the scene. So they all just left. And, they were like, I'm sure they got paid for the day, but they were like going home and they were like kind of bummed they're not on camera. And they all like mean mugged me like I did something to them. like I had anything to do with it.
How did you get the gig though?
So the character was named after me in the script. And so in season 3, there's a character named Jeff and there's a character named Kyle. So I think they just probably couldn't think of a name and just put my name there as a security guard.
We need an actor with the same name as this character. Yeah. Oh, there's Franky.
Yeah. So I texted Bill and I was like, hey, could I like play this character? And he was like, I think the studio, we got to get it over the studio and this and that. And I was like, okay, I got it. No worries. And then like, a few days before it shot, I got a call and they were like, oh, this is casting. You're playing the security guard. And I was like, what? So I was like, okay. And basically it was just like, okay, I know as an editor what I don't like from day players, which is when they try to be funny and they move their arms too much and they take over the scene. So I was like, okay. It's kind of like Gene Cousineau's advice. Honestly, I'm going to hit my mark and I'm going to say my lines and I'm not going to move and I'm not going to mess up the take.
I mean, watching through dailies, you nailed it. Every take is usable. I never had to cut around you. It was perfect. I was very excited. Biggest fangirl. I was like getting pictures all day. Let's see your name on the trailer.
Well, that's the other side of the story I wanted to hear. As cool as it is to hear about the editor that was in the show, I want to hear about the editor cutting the editor that was in the show.
So glad I didn't have to cut myself. Oh my God.
The best. Give me more Franky Guttman footage. I love it.
Was he checking in like, I got to see it? Or did he just not want to be anywhere near it?
Not just confident. No. Knew he nailed it. So just.
He didn't say, Allie, send me what you got. I want to see this.
No, he not even nervous, just full confidence. Hit your mark, say your lines, and he did it. It was great.
I do have I have like an improv comedy background. I did that for like 10 years, so I do have that like comfortability, but I was the most shocked when Bill said, okay, it's time for Franky's close-up. I was like, what? What are we doing? No.
And you better believe I used every moment of that close-up. Give me that close-up. I kept texting Bill, closer.
Since you brought up improv, that is something that comes up from time to time, outside skills that can help in editing. And Allie, I don't know if you have a background in improv as well or writing, but do you find things like that help you as an editor?
Sure. Maybe just more in like terms of an attitude of just like accidents can be beautiful and you don't just because somebody flubbed a line or something didn't come out the right way or just sort of letting the material come to you and not trying to like dictate it or like jam it into a script. So it's more in sort of like a philosophy than in terms of like a tool to make things better. It's more just sort of like, well, this is what came to us and let's make it the best, yes, and I guess is like the classic improv trope. So it's like just take what you have instead of trying to like smush it into what you thought it was going to be. Really think about like, oh, that's a mistake, but maybe that's a beautiful mistake.
I'd say that, like, I hope that kind of your personality is able to come through in the edit. And I know that sometimes people talk about editing as like an invisible art or something like that. But I hope that, like, your natural rhythm and your pace and the music you choose or kind of the way you build a scene, if you watch somebody's editing for long enough, you'll see that everyone does have a certain pace and style and brings a lot of personality. So I'd hope that like Franky's improv background or like I really love music, something like that, will come across eventually in kind of the way that we cut and the way we approach the footage and performance.
So before we move off of improv entirely, considering the background of your show's star director, is there a lot of improv on set or does everyone stick pretty close to the script?
There's improv, especially with NoHo Hank. There'll be like a lot of things that like as you watch the takes over and over, all of a sudden it gets funnier and funnier. Or there's like a part that they'll add that really makes it pop. Like Franky did a great job editing episode 2, and there was a long dialogue scene where they're running around the table at Dave & Buster's. And they did how many takes? It was like 6 takes. And then they came up with the idea that he runs back around to hit his mark so that the camera can catch up to him. And it ended up being the funniest.
We were like in the room and we were watching that. And Bill would like turn to somebody and was like, that's take 4. And I was like, no, Bill, that's take 17. They did like 14 takes of that.
They did 14 takes, but like that joke came like late, right? And he was like, you need to run back around.
It was the last take and he just decided to run back around, and it was just like, and that's a wonder. So it was just like, all right, we're using this one. That's like hilarious. I think he just decided to do that.
So funny.
Yeah.
But I think that like mostly the show sticks to the script, but that being said, the person who wrote all the scripts is on set. So like that also changes and adapts.
I have another fan question. Episode 307, Candy Asses. Franky, I think that's one of yours. We talked about Gene Cousineau's book being the chapters for season 1. In season 3, the 7th episode, you break with tradition on something else, and that is the opening theme, the little sting from Change the World by Charles Bradley. It's a little horn flourish. So that opens every show, except at 307, it goes away for the rest of the series. How come?
It's a great question.
Thanks.
I I think maybe that's part of the tonal shift that we're kind of going to, and we kind of liked having that. I mean, in 205 Ronnie Lily, we also didn't have the music.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it just started with the Barry credit, and then Ronnie Proxon drives up in his car playing Blood Rock. I think it's just maybe part of that tonal shift where it kind of feels like, there's only so like I think it's 204 when Barry's like, my name is, and it goes bah, 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 and it says Barry. It's like there's only so many times that you can do that joke, and I think maybe it's just sort of signaling like, all right, here we go. Like, buckle up. This is like the bah, 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 bah is kind of gone, and this is sort of like a new shift, and buckle up because like people are about to get mauled by panthers, and like we don't have time for that anymore.
In some ways, as an editor, not having the same theme song is like amazing. Like every time I hear the Portlandia theme song washed out, like in a restaurant, I'm like, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. Like I cannot hear the song one more time. But thankfully, that Charles Bradley song, like I'm not sick of it. So it's okay if I hear it in the world.
Well, because you only play as short that one horn blast bit at the beginning.
Yeah. We're only allowed to use 7 seconds of it or something like that. That was like the deal that they made. So we were not allowed to use more than 7 seconds. Not that we ever did. So
Franky coming through with the big behind the scenes nugget there.
There's the BTS legal stuff that people love.
That's what people come. That's what they're clicking.
The legal deal points.
Could throw away everything up to this point. Now that we got that, we have an episode. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about music. The needle drops in this show, the commentary they make, they're so funny. I was just making some notes the other day about different ones. You have Roxette's Must Have Been Love, which I think was famously in Pretty Woman. You've got, I can't remember the artist name of the song, Bitch.
Oh, yeah. That was a suggestion of, we were all sitting in the room thinking of funny songs. That was a suggestion of Dave Wingo, our composer. He was like, that'd be so funny if it was like I'm a bitch. I'm a lover.
Wait, do you do temp vocals when you don't have the song in yet? Will you sing it?
Yeah, totally.
We don't download it. Allie just sings them all.
So that goes right to the bottom line.
Yeah.
But there's also, Desperado. You end an episode in the prison where they're watching Rain Man, and you have the score from Rain Man play out the rest of the show. And then finally, probably my favorite is Extremes More Than Words when Barry's buying the guns. Is it just a group effort to figure out what works here, or how do you do it?
It's a mix. I mean, Liza Richardson's like an amazing music supervisor who's on our team. And then Bill, like some things like The Wizard, which is 406, like Bill had thought of that like a year prior when he was driving in his car and had like shot the scene.
That's the Fuchs, the Raven montage.
The Raven scene, the Black Sabbath song, like he had been totally envisioned that. And like I sent him the cut and he's like, no. The top of the convertible goes down on this exact beat, not on the beat you have it. And I was like, oh, he had it like exactly mapped out. Sometimes it's us, and sometimes we're in the room kind of just collaborating, trying to figure out songs, like scrolling our phones on our Spotify, trying to figure out something that works. And like it's like a cacophony of like 3 different phones playing music, and you can't even hear any of the songs. It really just depends. I think it is fair to say it's a team effort.
Yeah, sometimes you just put it in though, like you put in More Than Words and it was really funny. And then there was a song before that was too similar. And so then I just like came in one day and I thought of the song Finally. It was like, finally it happened to me right in front. And it made me laugh that it was like such a serious thing, but then it's just in this big box store and they're playing whatever.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I put Hootie and the Blowfish over the shot of all the like wounds of the gun wounds. I was just like, what's the worst song for gun wounds? And I guess they didn't have creative approval over that, or knew what their song was going to be on, or they didn't care, but
or knew how the editor felt about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like if we put in a song and Bill laughs at it, it's in. Like he doesn't feel like he has to pick every song or something like that. Like when we put in Bitch, he came in because we had locked the episode and we were doing a sound spot, and I was like still coming up with different songs there, and Wingo's like, you should put in Bitch. So then we put it in for the playback just without Bill seeing it, and then he laughs when you get there and you're like, okay, he likes it, it's in.
I bring up the needle drops to get to a bigger point about that, and maybe I missed one, but I think all the needle drops throughout the show are diegetic. It's never played over the top. It's always part of the natural soundscape of what's going on in the world of Barry. Is that true, or did I miss one? And if that is true, was that something that you were very overt about in doing, where Bill said, in Barry, we don't have music playing over the top. It is always being experienced through the characters.
We did have that got cut in season 2. I don't remember what episode it was. It was one that Kyle cut. And it was when it was like Sally and Barry broke up, and it's so hilarious. This is like, there's not a lot of deleted scenes from Barry, but this is one that, I have it on my Dropbox somewhere. Like it was so funny. And it's just like Barry in his room and he's like pulling apart the curtains. I wish I remember what song it was. It was like a song from, I'm killing myself now. That was the only time we did it. It was from like Dawson's Creek or something like that. It was so funny, but where it just, that was maybe one of the first times where it was like, this is too funny, and that's kind of like hurting the story. And I think after that, we kind of never tried it again.
I mean, there's certain scenes like the Raven montage starts full volume music, but then it ends in the car. And then same, like you mentioned, the Rain Man song starts in the TV and then it takes over the rest of the scene. But I feel like beyond those two, at least in the last 2 seasons, that's the only time I can think of like music playing over the show.
I got so wrapped up in Franky playing the security guard, I forgot this one other element. And that is episode 301. You actually have an avid in a scene with an editor sitting down editing.
Oh, yeah.
That's my assistant editor. That's DeAndre. And that was his office. Bill was like, we'll do it. DeAndre will be in it. He's so good. Isn't he amazing? We love DeAndre. He's a great assistant.
Love DeAndre.
He's so great. He was so nervous.
Hire DeAndre.
Don't hire him. He's fine. Okay. I want to keep him.
Never mind.
I mean, hire him. He's the best. He's just absolutely
my assistant, Chris DeGelsey, is also great. It's nice to have great people to work with that you like seeing on a day-to-day basis.
For sure. But that's just like in his office. They just came in, set up like that, and he's just sitting there. You know, like it was a plan, but like in a day to day, you would see that, So that was always fun because it feels very real to me, at least.
With Bill, obviously voices are kind of his thing. I know he did, I can't remember which episode this is. Sally's walking into the studio and there's the live animated billboards from Mega Girls and for some other show. And I think that's Bill doing the voices for that. Having him at your disposal, does he end up doing a lot of either it's temp or it's like he's just the voice for everything?
Oh, yeah. He's insane. Like his temp ADR, sometimes the actors will come in and be like, wait, that's not me. Like, it sounds so much like them. One of the benefits of having a impersonation expert be a showrunner.
That does kind of help. And you have an editor that can sing. So it's like, you got it all covered. So we talked about editor cameos, assistant editor cameos. The show actually has a lot of cameos. But what's really fun for me about season 4 is you actually have directors doing cameos. Certainly you have Sean Hayter playing herself, and that was key to the overall story. But Guillermo del Toro, what is the deal with Guillermo del Toro being in this show?
I know. That's crazy. And then that episode has 2 guest stars, like big, like Guillermo del Toro and then Fred Armisen, who's the sweatiest any guest has ever been.
It's so funny.
Like
how wet he is.
I feel like
so
sweat never really
like
shows in movies and TV, and they did a good job. He is so sweaty.
Okay, well, certainly Fred Armisen's an Easter egg of sorts with the history with Bill. There's one other one that maybe it's been mentioned other places. I've never seen it, but there is an Office Space reunion in Barry season 4.
Oh, it's Stephen Root and
Tom Smokowski from Office Space, Mr. Jump to Conclusion.
Yes.
Right.
Milton and Smokowski. Hello, anybody?
I think Richard really, I think, was like the first person that Bill met when I don't know, he should tell the story, it's his story, but he was the first when Bill moved out here to California. I think he was a friend of a friend's family or something, and so him and his buddies like moved out to California, and one of the first things they did was like sit down with him at a diner or something, and he like gave them advice on the industry, which is kind of crazy. So I think that's why
went to Bob's Big Boy and he was like, you're gonna do good, like being in LA is a good thing, like gave him encouragement, and he was like, I've been wanting to cast him ever since.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I love that. When I spotted that, I was very proud of myself, which doesn't take much. But I thought it was really cool to have this Office Space Easter egg in there.
It's the best.
Okay. So for pretty much the whole time, you two were working on your own episodes. For the finale, you two both worked on the finale. How did that work? What was the workload balancing that went on there?
Well, what the cool thing about how we work, and it's how Bill has always worked on this show, like with Jeff and Kyle, the first 2 seasons, like when they're cutting episodes, like both editors are in the room with Bill. So, and whoever's episode it is at the computer, and then the other person's kind of on the couch next to Bill, like giving notes. So we kind of have always like season 3 and 4, like whenever we're cutting, it's never just one of us in the room with Bill unless somebody's sick or something. Like literally we're always both in the room, which I think is like so helpful and so incredible, because it's like, I know Allie's episodes, she knows my episodes. We're both, something that Bill always said is like, want to make sure we're all telling the same story. And, when you are an editor and you only work on half the show or a third of the show, you tend to know your episodes really well. And then there's like this gap where like you read the script or you watched the cut, but you watched it once. And so you're like an expert on this small piece of the show, but then the rest of it, you're kind of like, oh yeah, where did they go? Who did they talk to? And so we don't have that at all on this, where it's like, we know. And so if one of us is out, like I had a lot of family emergencies this season. My father passed away, and we had a baby, and so it's like really easy, and Allie was like a superhero, like covering for me, but like kind of the way that we're able to like switch in and out and know each other's episodes so well, it's just a huge asset. And I wish we could do it on more shows where like we could all sit in the room together and kind of like while we're doing this. I mean, for time, you always can't do that, but I really love that about our process. So for the finale, Bill was kind of like really stressed out, and he kind of walked into the room one day and he was just like, you guys sit down and just like figure this shit out and like make a good finale. And we did. And I hope it worked very well.
There was like so much pressure on the finale. I think he
Yeah.
felt it, and unnecessarily. I think I'm
I
like
think
the show
so.
is so good. Don't worry, like people will like it. And I think he just had built it up so much that we did some extra days, the two of us, like refining it just based on kind of the way that the process had been for the last 7 episodes this season, and so just spent a few extra days together to like.
We really beat the crap out of that thing. We looked at every single, like, anything that wasn't working, we looked at every single take. We looked at everything, which I think really helped.
There's a lot of great stuff going on in the finale, but the shootout, the confrontation between Fuchs and Hank in the lobby of NoHo Ball, the two gangs come head to head. Hank has got Sally and John captive. Fuchs is there presumably to take John. And I won't get into what precipitates it, but there's a, screw it.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it now, this is a big spoiler.
Yeah.
Just let her
I
rip.
can't answer on it.
Yeah.
So basically, Fuchs says, I'll walk away. Just admit what you did to Cristobal. Hank snaps and says, deals off, and then guns start blazing. And in a very, very quick cut, less than a second, might even be a few frames, you see Fuchs cover up John, Barry's son. The end result is you see Fuchs get up and pick the kid up and go, come on, son, let's go. So why not let the audience clock that more? What was the decision behind, like, we want it in there, but just so it's almost just subliminal?
I feel like that part was always like, there was this long kind of drawn out confrontation discussion. And then I think Bill always wanted it just to be come out of nowhere and come super fast and everyone dies in a second. And it's like, it kind of just shows like how dumb it all is. Like, you're going to see this, like, it's building up this big action thing. It's going to be this big thing. Everyone is like, got all their guns. And then just everyone shoots each other immediately. And it's just done in 2 seconds. So I think that like having those quick cuts of like everyone preparing, we didn't want it to like turn into an action sequence. You wanted it to feel just like we're in this wide and everyone shoots each other and then it's done. And so I think keeping those short helped not build it up into this action thing and just kept it very kind of, for lack of a better word, stupid. Franky, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that was the whole kind of joke of it, is like, yeah, you think there's going to be this whole big showdown and then it's just like, and they're all dead. I think it's kind of great because, like, is it going to be John Wick or something? I don't think that's this show. I mean, there's the monastery in 208, but other than that, I think the message has always been just how, like Ali said, pointless it all is. So let's have it be the most pointless.
Yeah.
For the lack of a better word, stupid, and now we have pointless. So I think that's what I couldn't come up with a better way to close the show.
It's stupid, pointless. That's very.
I guess it's mostly just making sure that this show doesn't think that shooting each other is like glamorous or glorified in any way. That it's very matter of fact, and it's just like, this is an insane thing that people can't communicate better, and so everyone's going to die. And it's like a very sad kind of reality that, like, these characters, it's just not a way to like resolve conflict. And I think there's like an attitude about the violence in the show, which I appreciate.
Me too. Being such an amazing experience for both of you. I mean, it had to have been because it's an amazing show. What is it that you will take away from your experience working on Barry? What did you learn, or how are you changed somewhat as a person or as an editor moving on to your next job?
I think the thing I've learned, other than knowing that like might be the best job that I ever have, and it might all be downhill from here, because like, damn, Barry's such a good show. Everybody's so good. Everybody's so nice. The actors are so good. Like, it's so good. And you're just like, wow, who knows if I get to work on something that cool again. Also, just the kind of the thing we worked on a lot in season 3 and 4, which is kind of carrying along with me, is just like story and simplifying story and really thinking about like what comes next, what story are we trying to tell, and anything that's kind of off from that story or anything that's aside from that story we don't need. Or if we're like, Like, we did a bunch of reshoots in season 3, and it was mostly just because of story. Like, we sat down and we were like, the middle of the season's not really working because we're like taking all these detours that are fun and funny, but what's the story? And so I'm directing a documentary right now, and which is like my first film, and something I've taken from Barry, which I think has really helped me, is just like, wait, what's the story? And like, there's all this shit that I want to shoot, and like, let's do this. Oh, I want to be cool if we did this, and we put you up here, and we did this. And I was like, wait, what's the story? Like, what is this about? Anything that's not about what the story is about, like, forget it. Let's not waste our time on it. And that's something that I always knew, and you always know, like, people always say story, 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 to the point where it gets like annoying and it sounds like a cliche, but I think I never really fully understood it until like these last couple seasons of Barry, like watching how we shaped it and molded it, and also watching Bill like writing. Crazy opportunity to just be in the cutting room, and like Bill just gets a dry erase marker and goes on a whiteboard and starts like writing scenes in front of you, and just getting to watch his mind work and watch Bill just like literally just write an amazing scene right in front of you, and you're like, why is that better than what we had before? And it's always just like, it's on story. So I think that's creatively the thing that I'm going to take with me, you know, for the rest of my life, is just like the succinctness and the drive and pushing forward, which I think we're really focused on.
Yeah, that definitely sums it up for me too. I was gonna say like I feel like season 3 coming in, because as Franky mentioned, there were reshoots, and so we had the opportunity in the editing room to kind of go through the full process again of like, we have this story and there's parts of it that were a little hard to edit and a little hard to follow. And so it felt like going to film school in the middle, where you're like, oh my gosh, I see the first version, and then you see the one that ends up in the show, and you're like, there's so many details and so much performance that was refined and changed that helped it really make more sense and track better. And I think kind of he simplified a lot of shots and simplified a lot of scenes in a way that was so much sharper and funnier. And there were so many pieces that went from kind of a meandering scene that was about a couple things to a very funny, very direct, like scene that it was such a amazing experience getting to. It kind of felt like going to film school, where you're like, this is version A, this is version B, and now I understand so much more about like how to shape story and doing it while being funny and having it be one shot. And it was just so impressive to be able to put so much information in such a short amount of time. I also feel like, just like editing in general, he allows you to be patient. And that patience is something that I'm trying to bring through, that you're not cutting around all these different takes for performance, that you're letting a performance, if it's good, live and tell you a lot. And you don't always have to be on the person talking. And a lot can be done with holding off on the cut. And then it's way funnier when you finally do cut. And there's style things that he helped bring to the show that I think I'm going to bring kind of with me for the rest of my life, and giving us the credit and patience and ability to kind of be a little more creative with the way that we edit.
Very good. Okay, last question, I promise. During the course of this series, Cristobal says to Hank, you have to envision your future. That's the only way to make it happen. Looking ahead, what haven't you done yet that you hope to do? Or if this is the classic, what's your 5-year plan? 5 years from now, where do you hope to see yourselves? Any kind of genre, any kind of project, features, what is it? Where do you want to be down the road as an editor?
Oh, geez, like the classic interview question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
This is an interview.
It's fair. We should all have
Matt.
an answer
After
to this.
I want you to do it too.
Fair. Yeah, only fair.
Only fair.
I mean, as far as an editor, I just would love to work on things like Barry that are just like, I want to keep working on things that interest me and that have a compelling story. And I am directing this documentary that I'm really excited about. That has been really cool and really fun, and I'm going to be doing that over the summer, cutting that together. So that'll be cool, editing my own film and starting to see, as a director versus an editor, like understanding why the director doesn't get all the stuff that I want him to get or her to get as an editor. But yeah, I just want to keep making cool stuff and working on interesting stories. And, I have 3 kids, and so I want to be able to tell them that, like, when I'm leaving the house for 12 hours, that it's for a worthwhile reason and not just for a paycheck. And with Barry, I've been like lucky enough to be able to do that. So if I can keep doing that, I think that's amazing.
I would hope in the next few years there's a lot that I'm passionate about in my life. My husband runs a farm and I help start it as well. I'm really into urban agriculture and regenerative agriculture and climate work and stuff like that. And so I hope in the next few years I'm able to bring this one side of my life that's very tactile and growing food and being in the soil and all of that part of my life and my editing, and find a way. I don't know what it is yet, because I haven't worked on any climate related shows or movies or anything like that. But I would like to bring kind of this thing that I spend a lot of time learning about and researching and studying, and find a way to blend that into my passion for filmmaking and make things that are about some of the things I'm really passionate about, or help other people make things about those things that I'm super passionate about.
Well, both great answers. I hope you each realize those visions, those dreams.
Thank you. Is it your turn? Now you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hear it, man. Go for it.
That's turn.
Yeah, you can cut this
God.
out if you don't want it
Yeah.
on. Let's hear it. I want to hear it.
Let's see. First of all, I hope I'm still breathing 5 years from
Same
now.
here, yeah. Just
Yep.
basic. Hope we're okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to be doing this in an even bigger and better way. I'd like to continue the mission of spotlighting the amazing work that people like you do. And I don't know how you measure that, but I just hope I can keep going because I certainly enjoy doing it. And why wouldn't I after the talk we just had? It was so much fun. Personally, I want to thank you both for giving me 4 seasons of great entertainment. I'm kind of crushed that it's over. I'm sure you are too. I don't know how you could continue on, but if you talk to Bill, let him know, hey, they did it with Better Call Saul. So maybe some kind of prequel, like NoHo Henry, The Origins of Hank, something like that.
We agree. We love it. I missed all these characters already.
I know. Me too.
Well, thank you both for doing this. I had an awesome time.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Matt.
thanks,
I just
Matt.
love your podcast, and I can't wait to hear more about all of my favorite movies and TV. You do such a great job interviewing everyone, and I love listening.
Yeah, seriously.
Well,
thank you for having us on.
There's my 5-year plan. Those two are just too sweet. A big thank you to Allie and Franky for giving us their time. They are not only very kind, they are very talented. I can see why Bill Hader likes to hang out in the cutting room. And who wouldn't? Editors are so much fun to hang with. But first you gotta get in the room so you can do the hang. And the best way for you to do that is to get your media composer skills in order. That can be kind of hard to do if you don't have a media composer of your very own. Well, the good news is that Media Composer has never been more affordable than it is right now. Even free if you're a student. Details on all that are over on the Media Composer page of avid.com. So just hit that link in the show notes and it'll take you on your way. Have you been enjoying our recent exploration into TV editing? I have. So many great series to talk about, so many great editors to meet. And we'll do more of that, but it may be time to take a trip back to the cinema next week. We'll see. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.